Africa could avoid food shortages if it reduces the tangled web of rules, fees and high costs strangling regional food trade, and by putting large swaths of uncultivated land to productive use. The latest World Bank report shows that 5% of Africa's cereal imports are now provided by African farmers. It says trade barriers, blunt regional dynamism and reduced restrictions could boost trade and earn Africa an extra $20 billion annually. The bank estimated that 19 million people are in danger of hunger and malnutrition in West Africa's Sahel region. Yet removing cross-border restrictions could help avoid food crisis if farmers were allowed to trade more easily with each other and get food to communities facing shortages. Africa's population is currently estimated to be at 1 billion. The World Bank expects demand for food to double in the next 8 years as migration from rural to urban centers intensifies, reducing the number of people left to grow food.
Every year, the continent spends some $20 billion to bring in the kind of cereals, wheat, rice, and other staples that people need to feed themselves within the continent. And the projection is that it's going to double by 2020. The demand is going to double by 2020.
The World Bank report noted that yields for many crops in Africa are a fraction of what farmers are achieving elsewhere in the world. It added more food trade in Africa could help raise yields, spread new technology, and create jobs. Although Africa holds 60% of the world's arable land, it only generates 10% of global agricultural output. Food trade barriers also increase the cost to the consumer and the farmer. For example, farmers on holdings in Africa who sell surplus harvest typically receive less than 20% of the consumer price of their produce, with the rest being eaten up by various transaction costs and post-harvest losses. The new report suggests that since majority of Africa's farmers are women, their contribution would be significant in ensuring food security if they received support in terms of credit lines and farm inputs. This could in turn create more jobs in services such as distribution while reducing poverty and cutting back on expensive food imports.
And a very small fraction of the amount of land that can be cultivated in Africa is actually being cultivated for food. So there's enormous potential to increase output. But to do that, African farmers need incentives to do that. And often the nearest market, the nearest large market for farmers is across a border. And constraints on trade, rules and regulations, very much hampering African farmers in getting their food across borders, limiting the incentives that they have to invest in new seeds, to invest in fertilizers, and to increase their output and productivity.
The bank said rules and regulations are preventing African farmers from using higher yielding seeds and better fertilizers. In some countries, it can take 2 to 3 years for new seed varieties to be released, even if they've been used elsewhere in Africa. High transport costs were an impediment to more food trade across Africa, especially for small farmers. While poor roads and lack of infrastructure are a problem in Africa, transport cartels are also common, with little incentive for investment in modern trucks. Countries in West Africa, for example, could halve their transport costs within 10 years if governments undertook policy reforms that spurred more competition. Roadblocks and bribes at border posts also add to the cost of getting food to markets. Soaring global food prices in 2008, which triggered social unrest in several African countries, highlighted the problem of decades of underinvestment in agriculture in Africa. It also stimulated interest among investors in Europe, the Middle East and Asia in Africa's untapped farming potential. Fears of land grabbing also increased. The World Bank report says the institution's agriculture support for Africa totaled $1.7 billion between June 2011 and June 2012.